Hey guys, so about a week ago, season 1 of The Traitors came out on Peacock. It's a good show, I highly recommend you check it out, but it inspired me to do a player ranking for the season, ranking all 20 players based on the games that they played during the season. Now, obviously, The Traitors is a bit of a weird show to do this for, both from a format standpoint, where obviously there's different ways of being eliminated, but also from an edit standpoint, where there are some characters that we simply didn't get a good read on based on their gains, but I'm going to do my best here. But there are 20 players to rank here, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 20, the player I believe played the worst game on the Trader Season 1 is Geraldine. Now, it's a bit weird because Geraldine is technically the second boot of the season, however she was the first to be voted out at the roundtable, and for me that is a bigger knock against one's game versus simply being murdered. However, if we're looking at Geraldine's game, she never seemed to have any close allies, and we even had people immediately suspect her of being a traitor due to her reaction after they took out their blindfolds, and that really was defining a lot of her game. She says that her plan was to make people comfortable around her, and she obviously tries to take out Michael at the first roundtable. However, it's largely unsuccessful, and she's obviously voted out in an 11-8 vote, getting all the traitors' votes. And really, I don't think she did too much to really save herself. Now, I'll admit that there haven't been too many postseason interviews from these early boots, so it's possible she could have been targeted for other reasons. But based on what we saw on the show, she didn't really have too many means of saving herself. She didn't really seem to have many people on her side outside the people that voted to save her, which is why I do have her here at number 20. Now we're moving on to number 19, and we actually have the first boot of the season now, and here we have Reza. And Reza did play a pretty bad game. He was obviously very domineering during the first challenge. He didn't seem to build too many bonds outside of his core alliance of Kate and Brandy. And I don't think he would have done super well even if he wasn't murdered on the first night. However, he was murdered on the first night, and obviously that's a big knock. The fact that he painted such a big target on his back to where he was an appetizing choice for the traitors to take on. But due to the fact that he wasn't formally voted out at a roundtable, that does give him a bit of an edge over Geraldine. And plus, he was shown at least having that group of Kate and Brandy to begin with, so he had a bit more allies in the game. But at the end of the day, he was still the first boot, which is why I do have him here at number 19. Now we're moving on to number 18, and we're actually jumping a bit forward in the boot order now. However, this was a pretty notable presence during the early game. But here we have Michael, and Michael also played a pretty bad game. He admits to having a bad social game that caused so many people to suspect him of being a traitor early on, and he also gets pretty confrontational, like his whole thing during the challenge that really did not bode well for him, and he got votes at each of the roundtables that he went to that eventually culminated in him being voted out at the final 15. And really, the main reason he was kept around as long as he was is because he was such a big target that the traitors were using him as a shield. And had it not been for that, he probably would have been voted out much earlier in the game. So I can't really reward him too much as he didn't really do himself many favors. But again, he did make it through a couple of rounds. He did at least have the benefit of benefiting the traitors game by being a shield, and he did seem to recognize that to a degree. But by the end of it, it was his bad social game that caused him to be taken out, which is why he is here at number 18. Now we're moving on to number 17, and this person's kind of like Geraldine in that they didn't seem to have too many people in the game, and they were taken out relatively early, but they have a bit more going on with them. But here we have Azra, and Azra was another relatively early boot, and obviously her big thing is her friendship with Angelica that does give her a bit of an edge over some of these people we already talked about. She at least had one ally in the game, and she does admit that her strategy of laying low was an effective one and one that could have potentially drawn suspicion away from her. But then she ultimately does draw suspicion during that roundtable where Kyle calls her out and she decides to respond back, which isn't the best look. Now, Kyle was already coming off as a bit domineering through his nature in the roundtable discussions. However, this whole situation just set her up pretty perfectly to be taken out by the traitors, as it would have painted a bigger target on Kyle's back moving forward, so it makes sense why she was taken out there. And outside of that, there isn't too much to really prop up her game, but it's those minor pros that do leave her here at number 17. Now we're moving on to number 16, and we have the earliest boot left to talk about, but here we have Bam, and Bam was severely under-edited across the season, where really his only content was his friendship with Christian, and he talks about him cherishing friendships more than game, and he did seem to be well liked in the game, with him being taken out due to it seeming like a random option in order to throw off suspicion from the rest of the house. And obviously, that's a bit unlucky on Bam's and the fact that he was taken out for that reason, as he didn't seem to do too much wrong and he seemed well liked enough. And obviously, his friendship with Christian could have bought him some safety moving forward, as obviously it would have potentially drawn suspicion away from Christian and it would give Christian someone to back him up. However, he was still a very early boot in the season, and there really isn't too much outside that to prop him up, which is why I do have him here on number 16. Now we're moving on to number 15, and this person may seem a bit too high. However, they do have one major pro going for them. But here we have Brandy. Now, Brandy is another very early boot, and you could say that she did it to herself, where she was obviously throwing out Siri and Christian's names, which incentivized like those two to go after her at the next roundtable. And she is the second boot of the season, being voted out 8-6-3 at the second roundtable. And that's not great. And similar to Reza, she did have a target on her back due to her Bravo alliance with Kate and Reza. Not great there. However, two things going for her. One, the fact that she had that alliance to begin with, and while you can say that they painted too big of a target on their back, the fact that she at least had solid allies is good on her part. And plus, and this is the big thing, she was one of the very few people on the season that ever suspected Siri of being a traitor. As you see moving forward that so many people are convinced that Siri is a faithful, that makes Brandy's suspicions really stand out and really props her up to a degree. Now, at the end of the day, she is a very early boot, and I feel like she didn't play that last round super well. However, it's the fact that she did sort of suspect Siri early on that does leave her here at number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14, and we have someone who made it very deep into the game, and I did consider putting them a bit higher because of that. However, I think they also played a very bad game, but here we have Kate, and obviously Kate got all the way to 5th place. However, she was very rarely in the majority during the game, and as she was constantly being targeted as a traitor, and I feel like she doesn't do herself many favors. Now, early on, similar to Reza and Brandy, she is part of that alliance. However, once that alliance gets picked off, she does draw suspicion. That is only made worse when she decides to write down that whole note with Shelby and Amanda's names on it. That does paint a additional target on her back. And from that point on, she is considered a prime target for the rest of the game. And eventually, she just gives up, basically. She obviously starts sabotaging everyone in the challenges to reduce the prize pool. She gets into a lot of fights with Rachel during the season, which are pretty funny, but it's not good gameplay. And by the end of it, she is dragged to the end as she is a perfect shield. The traitors take her along due to her being a shield, and while she recognizes that, it's still very bad play, and she doesn't do herself any favors to build good favor with the people still in the game. So she's sort of like Michael, where ideally she would have been voted out much sooner, especially with the faithfuls outnumbering the traitors. However, it's due to the benefit that she has with the traitors, as well as people feeling like it would just be an easy vote out, that does lead her to being dragged as far in the game as she is. And I feel like by the end of it, she isn't even trying to win the game. She's just trying to screw over everyone that mistreated her. So I can't really put her too much higher than that due to how bad she played. And because of that, she is here at number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and we have someone who I don't think is the worst player in the world. However, I don't think they played super well, at least in one aspect of the game. But here we have Kyle. And I think Kyle's someone who could do well on other shows like Big Brother or Survivor. However, on this show, I think he struggled a lot with threat management. And I don't like the way that he handled a lot of the roundtables, where he just led so many of the discussions and he tended to talk so much, trying to lead the charge to take out the traitors, that eventually painted a target on his back. And the traitors recognized that he could be used as a shield, especially once he has that exchange with Azra that results in Azra being murdered. It really makes Kyle look bad. Now, to Kyle's credit, he does try during that final round to paint the target onto Cody's back. Cody obviously confides in him that information, that lie, that Ryan was suspicious of him, that causes Cody to become a bit sus. However, it's due to Kyle like really strong arming Andy, trying to get them to flip, that results in him being targeted next. And that's not great. I think Kyle is a bit too domineering at points, and that results in him being taken out. However, I think he still has plenty of potential within a game moving forward, and I would be interested to see him try to play another social strategy game. But based on the game that he played here, I can't really have him too much higher than 13. Now I'm moving on to number 12, and we're moving on to a couple players that I just don't know much about, as they were very under-edited on the show. And while there isn't too much good to praise about them, I don't think there's as much bad to knock them for, or at least based on what we saw from the show. But at number 12, we have Amanda. And Amanda was severely under-edited as well. Now, a lot of that's because she ended up having to leave the game due to personal reasons, and through that, that probably led to her getting a very small edit. That does lead us to not knowing much about her game. But even then, she was still a target, like due to her being on Kate's list. Like she was a potential option to be murdered due to it potentially putting a target onto Kate's back. However, she is able to survive. She is able to get all the way to 12th place before she has to leave the game. So really, there isn't too much to say about her game, which is why she's here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and there is a debate for this person being below Amanda, as there's a bit more wrong with this person's game. However, I feel like there's also more pros with this person's game as well. But here we have Shelby, the other person on Kate's document. And there's a bit more wrong you can say with her. She definitely drew suspicion after Cody was exposed as a traitor. People didn't like the way she reacted to that. Whereas everyone else was getting up and jumping around and cheering, she just remained in her seat, which didn't bode well for her. Now, to her credit, she does try to turn things around, and we see her build a good bond with Siri to where even Siri gets upset at the idea of voting her out, but it's not enough, and she is voted out as a result. So really, there isn't too much good to pray about Shelby's game, and she does have that knock of painting a target on her back. However, that minor pro is enough to put her above Amanda, and because of that, she is here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we have another player in this tier, but here we have Angelica, and I don't think Angelica played actively bad, as I feel like she was mostly just dangling in the game. She was seen as pretty expendable, and I feel like she got pretty emotional at points, like when Azra was murdered. She was obviously put on trial due to her getting emotional, and she's eventually murdered due to the fact that she could potentially be picked up as a number for the other side. So I feel like she struggled a lot with positioning throughout the game, and outside of her bond with Azra, I don't think she did much to build one-on-one bonds to avoid that perception of her being this free agent that could be picked up to take out one of the traitors moving forward. However, I feel like compared to Amanda and Shelby, I feel like there's a bit more I could say about Angelica's game. And plus, outside of her being passive, I don't think there's much actively bad you can say about her game, which is why I do have her here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we actually have the earliest boot left here to talk about, but here we have Ryan. Now, Ryan was taken out the earliest of these people we already talked about. He was taken out in 14th place, and he was partly targeted due to his bond with Cody. However, I feel like that's also a big reason why I have him so high. The fact that Cody was so willing to fight to save Ryan that he even got into an argument with Siri and Christian about it. And while Cody eventually capitulates to Siri and Christian to allow Ryan to go out, I feel like the fact that Cody was willing to fight that hard to save Ryan is a big pro for me. Bigger than the pros I can give to the players we already talked about. And yes, he did get a very small edit. He did come off as a bit of a dodo at points. However, I still feel like he was good enough socially to be a big figure within the house. However, he was still taken out relatively early, so I can't have him too much higher than here, but I still find him more impressive than any of the players we already talked about. So he's here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, where I feel like we're moving on to another tier of players here, where outside the top 2, I feel like the players who we're about to be talking about are still pretty flawed and definitely have holes in their game. However, they're obviously a step above the players we already talked about. Although at number 8, we actually have the player who has the biggest holes in their game. And here we have Cody, the first traitor on the board. And I was pretty excited to see Cody coming into the season. And obviously, I was excited to see him be a traitor. And I feel like throughout the season, it was interesting seeing him navigate the game. However, I also think he makes plenty of missteps. You obviously have him talking to Kyle about why Ryan could have been murdered, which is completely unnecessary and obviously prompts Kyle to try to target Cody at the next roundtable. And while Cody is able to survive, it does bode an issue for him moving forward. You obviously have him fighting to save Ryan. That causes Siri and Christian to question whether it's worth it to work with Cody moving forward. And while he is able to outlast Kyle, we see this target grow to the point where he is eventually taken out at the final 11, with even Siri and Christian voting in the majority to take him out. So I feel like Cody played the most flawed games of the Traitors, where he is someone who has good strategic reads, and it was interesting hearing him talking about the game. But I feel like he made more unforced errors that caused the target to grow on his back that eventually resulted in him being taken out at the final 11. And yes, while some of that could be due to pregame, where obviously he had the reputation of being this dominant Big Brother winner, I still feel like those mistakes caused his own downfall, which is why he is here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we actually have the other Big Brother player from this season, and here we have Rachel Riley. And Rachel was very entertaining across the season, and it's pretty impressive that she's able to get all the way to the final 8. Now granted, I think a lot of that was due to the fact that there were other Big Brother and Survivor players that she could align with. And I do think she was a bit closer to figuring things out compared to a lot of the other players we talked about. She obviously becomes suspicious of Cody at a point, and she even votes in the majority throughout a lot of the game. However, she is also someone that eventually paints a big target on her back that results in her being voted out at the final 8. And I don't think that's particularly great. I also don't love how she keeps engaging in arguments with Kate, but to be fair, I think Kate was also initiating that to a degree, so take that as you will. But at the end of the day, I can't really have Rachel higher than number 7 here. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we actually have one of these Survivor players from the season, but here we have Stephanie LaGrossa. And I feel like Stephanie also played very similar to how she played on her previous seasons of Survivor. She came off as a very similar personality. Now, granted, she was able to build pretty good social bonds and largely avoid suspicion throughout the game, and even had decent reads at points. Like, she is one of the people to target Cody and is eventually able to get out Cody. However, she is also one of these people that keeps trying to target Kate, even though Kate did a lot to paint a target on her own back. She is the one who picks up the note that Kate had, which is pretty good there. However, she also paints too big of a target on her back, particularly when she starts suspecting Siri. And I do have to give her a lot of credit. She is one of the few people to pick up on Siri. However, that also leads to her being targeted at the final 7, where she is murdered due to her potentially undermining Siri's game. So I still think she played a good game, but there are still some issues that leave her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we probably have the toughest person to assess out of anyone on this list, as they have some pretty major pros, but they also have some pretty major drawbacks. But here we have Christian, one of the other traitors, and Christian is such a weird player to talk about, where on one hand, he doesn't shut up. Like, he makes so many unforced comments during the season that probably should have painted a target on his back. Like, he just volunteers these ideas during breakfast, like talking about why certain people could have been murdered, what is like a good move or a bad move for traitors to be making, and these are just ridiculous. Now, I kind of understand where he's coming from. He wants to volunteer game ideas so that he could build trust with people. However, these comments are just completely unnecessary, and it really is baffling that he's able to get so far into the game despite him making these comments. However, at the same time, I do think he did a good enough job of building social bonds to where he wasn't able to be targeted nearly as much. Like, it's really crazy how he was able to skate on by through so much of the game, building these great bonds with a lot of players in the house. And he is, for the most part, pretty good strategically. Like, he is someone who is capable of playing these games. And I feel like through that, Christian could do well on a future season. However, it really is his mouth that does him in, where he eventually does make that announcement that he was recruited to be a traitor, which is 1000% unnecessary and really is the thing that paints such a big target on his back, to where despite the traitors having this golden opportunity to take the majority at the final 6, they decide to vote him out anyway, which really is insane. Like, the fact that Siri and Ari decide to take this harder road to the end by sacrificing one of their own numbers because of Christian's own actions is a major nod to his game. But still, the fact that he was able to build good bonds, the fact that he wasn't suspected nearly as much as he probably should have because of the relationships that he built, is impressive, and a big reason that he is at least as high on the list. But again, I feel like he did more to take himself out of the game. That leaves him here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this is another player that I have some issues with. However, they did get all the way to the end. But here we have Quentin, and Quentin is another player that I have some issues with. I feel like he has really bad reads on the game, where early on he is very supportive of Michael, despite the fact that Michael was such a big target, and he even went so far as to vote to save Michael across a lot of these votes, even though he himself is a faithful and really doesn't have much incentive to save Michael per se. But he stands by Michael. Later on, he stands by Cody as well. He even sticks up for Cody during the round where he is voted out. Again, like, why is he doing this? Like, he knows that he is a faithful, and yet, even though he isn't 100% sure that Cody is a traitor, like, the fact that he goes along with Cody anyway, even though everyone else seems to suspect that he could be a traitor, is another bad look there. And obviously, he is unable to detect that Siri or Christian are traitors until it's very deep into the game. And even in the round where Christian is voted out, he doesn't even vote out Christian, which is pretty baffling there as well. So it really is funny how Quentin stands by these people that are such big targets in the game, despite the fact that doesn't really benefit him to do so. And even at the end, when Siri votes to continue the game and Ari reveals that he was recruited to be a traitor, the fact that he doesn't pick up that maybe there was one other traitor in the game, someone that could have recruited Ari, is another bad look there. So on the whole, I think Quentin didn't have a good read of the game, and it really is confusing why he does back behind certain people that he probably shouldn't have. But again, he did at least get to the end of the game. So because of that, I do have him here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and we actually have the highest ranked faithful left to talk about. But here we have Andy. And I have similar issues with Andy's game where I feel like they didn't have the best read on things. I think they trusted Siri way too much and didn't even consider voting to continue the game even after Ari removed himself. And I think compared to people like Rachel and Stephanie, I think Andy had worse overall reads on the game. However, the main reason I have Andy this high on the list is their threat management, where they were never targeted at any point. They were seen as this genuinely faithful person, and to their credit, they were playing faithfully. They didn't see themselves as playing that much of a strategic game. So much of their content throughout the season is about their relationships and how hard it is to vote people out. And the other thing is that Andy was in the majority for more of the game compared to Quentin, where they are voting out Michael, they vote out Kyle, they vote out Cody, they vote out Christian even, they even vote out Rachel. And yes, while it is a knock that they aren't taking out the right people that allows the traders to get deeper into the game, the fact that Andy is more in sync with the rest of the house is enough to have them above Quentin. But again, they still trusted Siri way too much, and even then, I don't think they were playing that hard. So because of that, I do have them here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and obviously the top 2 are traitors, and there is a very obvious number 1. So at number 2, we do have Ari, and I think Ari played a pretty decent game for the most part. I think he was a very agreeable person and someone that was pretty well positioned for the most part. Now, yes, there is some suspicion early on that he could have been a traitor, but that goes away pretty quickly, and from that point on, he's very well trusted. And he obviously has that really ridiculous streak where he gets 3 shields in a row. So he is safe during a decent stretch of the game. But even then, I don't think he was being targeted at any of those rounds. So there's that. He obviously gets recruited to become a traitor and he takes it on. And I do think he plays that part of the game pretty well. He is able to stay in the majority. He's able to avoid suspicion during the end game. And he obviously gets to the final 4 with Siri until Siri decides to continue the game, hoping to win the game for herself. And at that point, he does give up. He does allow Siri to win it. And yeah, that is a bit of a knock. However, at the end of the day, I still think Ari played a pretty good game for the most part. And especially compared to a lot of the players we already talked about, I feel like he has fewer holes within his game. But again, there's a very clear number 1. So because of that, he's here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the player I believe played the best game on the Trader Season 1 is the winner of the season. And here we have Siri Fields. And what is there to say? I think Siri played a masterful game. She was picked as a trader at the beginning, and I feel like she navigated the game so well where she was able to pick all the right targets that avoided suspicion on her back. She laid back as a trader during a lot of the game, allowing Cody and Christian to call the shots early on until she eventually gets her way during the Ryan round. And from there, she's able to escape so much of the targets Like when Cody's being picked up as a target, like none of the suspicion comes onto her. People trust her very well, despite her already having this reputation as a great survivor player. People trust her, and she's able to build some very strong bonds with people like a Shelby that allow her to get through the game. People like an Andy trust her as well, to the point where they never consider targeting her. And despite her doing all this work, there are very few points where she's even suspected of being a traitor. Where really the only people to ever suspect her of being a traitor are Brandy, who was voted out relatively early, and Stephanie, who is murdered almost immediately afterwards. And even then, no one suspects Siri moving forward. I think she also benefits a lot from having people like a Cody and Christian as traitors that allow her to basically hide behind him during a lot of the game as bigger targets are being taken out. And I do think she makes a bit of a misstep towards the end game. I don't like that she votes out Kate at the final five, as that could have opened things up for her to be seen as a traitor. But again, it doesn't really blow back at her at any point. Ari and Quentin are so trusting of her that even at the point where Ari pulls himself from the game and says that he was recruited to be a traitor, meaning that there could have been one more traitor in the game, Andy and Quentin still vote to end the game even after that point, and obviously she ends up winning the game there. On the whole, it's a very incredible game. I am so happy that Siri finally gets to win a game of social strategy, and it's really good seeing her coming back after Game Changers and seeing her dominate a game of the Traitors. I feel like she really laid the path forward for Traitors moving forward, and I'd be very excited to see how the show progresses from here. But on the whole, there isn't really much to say here. Suri is here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. Now, I do plan to make more general content like this moving forward, so stay tuned for that. Australian Survivor is coming up soon, so I plan to do coverage of that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that's the video. See ya.